Welcome to the Glucose Never Lies podcast. I'm John Pemberton, a diabetes educator and researcher living with type 1 diabetes since 2008. I started the Glucose Never Lies website when my son tested positive for type 1 diabetes antibodies. In that moment, I realized I needed to build a resource strong enough to guide anyone who might care for him. At first, that meant writing clear, actionable management guides, but listening to Peter Attia's The Drive taught me something. Peter's conversations provide depth across nutrition, exercise, pharmacology, sleep, and much more. But I always find myself wondering, how does this information apply to people with type 1 diabetes? And this podcast is my attempt to fill that gap, where I have access to the world's leading researchers and thought leaders in type 1 diabetes. That gives me a unique opportunity to combine lived experience, professional expertise, and cutting-edge science, and to share it all on here in conversation. But an important note, this podcast is for informational purposes only. These conversations share knowledge and experiences. They do not create a therapeutic relationship. So, let's get started. Welcome to the Glucose Never Lies podcast. This is part one of a partying special, a three-part special with one of my favorite people in the diabetes world, Dessi. Now, Dessi, I've got to say, I literally known you for a long time and I still can't pronounce your last name. So give me the last name. Is that how I'm actually meant to present it or pronounce it?
Zaharieva. Thanks, John. It's so good to see you.
So obviously, this will be the first time the Glucose Never Lies podcast listeners will have heard you on the show, but certainly you've had a huge influence on me personally with my diabetes education journey, but also in terms of helping shape some of the content. So in the background, you've sort of come on board as a scientific advisor. So first of all, I want to say thank you for that. And then second of all, I want to let the audience know why. So I would say on my best day, I think I'm probably in the top 5 diabetes educators in the world. But I know I'm not number one because I know you hold that spot. Because I've seen you present and I just educate people in such a just an easy to understand way, but also a very relatable way. So yeah, you're my North Star on the chasing on the diabetes education front. So I'll give you that for sure.
Look, we can agree to disagree because you're up there for me as well, and I'm always learning from you. But you know what? This is why we get along so well. I think we message each other probably every day. So we're always learning from each other.
Yeah. But to give you sort of the official introduction for some of the amazing things that you've done, obviously you're now at Stanford as an instructor / researcher, multiple roles there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I have been 6 years now at Stanford as an instructor, exercise physiologist, and diabetes educator. I work entirely on the research side, so I'm actually not really seeing patients often in clinic settings, except once a month when we lead our exercise education program through the clinic. So a little different to what you do, where you actually get to see patients a lot more often, but the research still needs to be done.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's also the research that I think the reason why I value your work and obviously came across your work is it's about what matters to people in terms of living with diabetes, the stuff that you do, whether it's kind of exercise or even, you know, some of the research you've done with the pods, with swimming in water and connection things. So it actually makes a difference on the ground every day. So I think there's research for doing like mechanistic stuff, which is great, but then there's also stuff that actually relates directly into what people's lives and things impact them. So yeah, I think it's important to value from there. So just to give kind of the listeners a bit of a background on this kind of series it's going to go through, it's going to be a 3-part series on partying with type 1 diabetes. And I put this together as an original guide on the Glucose Never Lies because I like to party. It's just, you know, there's no other way of saying it. So I like to party. And I've had some amazing nights and some amazing experiences, but I've also had some challenging times with managing type 1 diabetes throughout that as well. So I wanted to kind of present an honest guide, not really that can suggest to be evidence-based, because as far as I'm aware, there's not randomized controlled trials of people going out, drinking 30 units of alcohol and dancing all night and seeing what happened. Unless, are you aware of any of those?
Not any RCTs, definitely, but I can tell you through a lot of the events that we've done, whether it's nonprofit organization groups or some study settings where there has been a little bit of testing the waters just to see if we could do a little bit in a controlled setting. Why not do a little bit of have a couple drinks and see what happens? I think it's important, but you're right. the actual structured studies are not available from what I know as well.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of caveat everything that's going to be said in the next kind of 45 minutes to 50 minutes is this information that we're giving is based around lived experience of people such as ourselves and people who we know, and things that have given people a safe place to start with how to think about tackling alcohol management, partying, drugs, etc. But it doesn't mean that what we're discussing is medical advice for anyone. It's just ideas in the direction of things that will try and provide a level of safety. So always speak with your healthcare team. Don't take what is said here as a permission to go and try these things and use the strategies we're suggesting. We're just letting you know what is used commonly within the lived experience, what generally tends to work well, but it does require speaking to your diabetes team and knowing yourself, because we obviously don't know yourselves, and then also thinking it through from knowing yourself. And the reason why I say that is we know that the substances that we're going to be talking about, whether it's alcohol, stimulants, cannabis, etc., as we move forward, they have a direct impact on a psychoactive perspective on the brain. And everyone's unique physiology might mean that that's great for somebody, but it may cause addiction in somebody else. So that has to be respected. And the brain is developing from the ages up to the ages of 25, but specifically up to the age of 18, your brain is wiring long-term patterns, and introducing substances like that is going to change things. So that has to be respected. And although we'll have a laugh and be quite frivolous about some of the conversations, there is a serious element with that. And also with specifically alcohol, we know people have died. People have died by consuming a lot of alcohol, having serious hypoglycemic events, and unfortunately have not made it out the other side. So we don't want to belittle any of that. Because that is serious, obviously, and very upsetting for some people, I'm absolutely sure. But on the flip side to that, there are hundreds of thousands of people with diabetes who are going out, consuming various substances, having a great time, and also we need to provide some relatable and honest information. So that's a long way of saying if this is something that's sensitive to you, you might want to turn off right now. But if also to someone who's going to be exploring these things, or maybe is currently having struggles at the moment, there may be some insights in here that offer you something a bit more than you currently have at the moment. I think that's a fair framing.
I think so. I think one last bit that I wanted to say is this is a heavy topic, and the reality is I don't want to speak for you, John, but I never really got much guidance around this. It's not something you, especially I've had diabetes almost 30 years. You don't go around talking to your providers about how to do this. Maybe it was a little bit more cliche. Now I think many providers are open to having these discussions and earlier. So I think the important part is I wish I had learned this earlier, and maybe this will be something that can help someone that's trying to navigate this.
Yeah, 100%. And also, obviously, there'll be healthcare professionals listening to this. And hopefully, I'll introduce some of the techniques that I do when I speak to people, just to make it so normalized that, yeah, I'm sure there's people in your peer group who are kind of going and doing stuff like this, going and getting smashed, blah, blah, blah. And it just invites people to allow them to speak to you in a way where you realize that it's quite commonplace. And I think sometimes just having that initial conversation a way in offers an opportunity for, for learning and actually being comfortable to say what's really going on rather than what you think they want you to hear, which is natural human behavior, but not helpful when we're talking about something as potentially dangerous as alcohol in this particular context.
Agreed.
So let's find out a bit more about you. So you're going to be on this 3-part series over the next couple of months or whatever. So tell us a little about your type 1 diabetes journey. Where did it start? You've gone from scientist to lived experience. How did it all start? How have you got to here in a, relatively reasonable time frame?
I was going to say, I'll keep this short because I want to get to the beef of the exciting content that we're going to be covering, but appreciate the question. I have had type 1 diabetes, like I said, almost 30 years now. I think after a while, you lose track. I do remember I was diagnosed with type 1 December 19th. And so, right around the holidays for me, it was a challenging time. I was quite young, and the diagnosis journey for me was tough. My family had just come a couple years prior from Bulgaria to Canada, was still learning the language. Like English wasn't our first language for my family. And it was just a lot to navigate. Diabetes was really, we didn't have Bulgarian translators. There was a lot to learn. And a lot of shame behind it, thinking that it was something I did wrong. And so a tough kind of journey, as it is for many. And so I think just normalizing that it's a journey for everyone. In that, I switched over to starting to research in type 1 diabetes and exercise, because as an active kid growing up, I knew that that was my biggest struggle, was understanding what was happening to the body. And actually ties into a little bit of what we'll talk about today with drinking, is that delayed risk of hypoglycemia. Many hospitalizations for me growing up, and not something I'm proud of, but a learning opportunity where to go into research and really understand the body. That was really important for me, and both from a research perspective, but also having the lived experience so we could educate back what we've learned over the years.
Yeah, I mean, something that certainly rung true to me every time I heard you speak before getting to know you a bit better on a personal level was, that understanding of there's research and there's information and there's application in your life, and that has to come through trial and error. And some of that trial and error can be a scary place, but being able to then share that so that other people potentially will be able to short circuit some of those real downsides and be able to maximize the fun and to minimize the risk. And really, that's kind of what I would like to get across in the next kind of 40, 50 minutes or so, is kind of how can we help people think about managing alcohol specifically in this one, and so get the most out of it with minimal risk. So
Agreed.
with
I
that,
think that's the main goal. Yeah, let's jump in.
So with that, tell me about in the US, what's the legal limits for alcohol? It depends on state, right?
Yeah. So even this for me, I'm Canadian actually. So I still have to navigate that there's a lot of differences. Even coming to the US, legal drinking age is different here than it is in Canada. So again, 21 feels quite old. Like I know for me coming from Canada, it was younger. And so I just think, again, different countries, different places. We should also remember that legal drinking age differs depending on where you go. And I'll speak on, I was born in Bulgaria. I know maybe not legal drinking age, but you can say that certain parts of Europe, they might start a lot younger than
I'm going to tell you
even.
straight up. I started drinking at 12 years old on the street corner with my mates. That's just like the reality of where I grew up. It was just completely normal for, I don't know, normal's the right word, it's normal within my peer group that secondary school, went out, met on a Friday night and go down the shop and somehow managed to get 4 cans of beer. And that was just kind of just my peer group and how it was. So yeah, I'm sure there's people in a very similar situation. I think I didn't have type 1 diabetes at that point. I think if I did, things might have been different, but I'm sure that that is happening. I'm absolutely certain it will be. So there's the legal drinking age, but then there's also reality of your peer group, your social situation. So yeah, I think it's just important. There's a legal limit for an age for a reason, which is, to look after your brain, look after your health. But then there's also the reality. So what's the healthy amount or the healthy limit supposedly for alcohol consumption then?
John, when I read this based on kind of published literature, I sometimes think, do I have a drinking problem? Because when you see, even ADA guidelines saying 1 drink a day for women, and I just think, look, I'm not having a drink every single day, but on weekends, it's quite easy to be well over 1 drink for me sometimes, and thinking that 1 drink and that's it for a day. Yes.
Sometimes.
Yeah, well, so 1 drink a day for women and 2 drinks for men. That's kind of what the guidelines suggest. And so I think, again, not most days of the week is this happening, but a lot of times when you look at kind of what the guidance is around binge drinking, I think many of us fall into this category, especially on weekends or at an event, at a party. Yeah, those kinds of things.
Yeah, 100%. So I think a binge is classified as 8 units or more. And that's basically me every time I go out on a weekend. If I'm having a drink, I'm going over 8 units 100% every time. It's just what's going to happen. So
do we want to talk about that now? Because I'm actually just wondering, even for some people, units of alcohol are different than what someone might think. I think I had to go back and even just remind myself of what these are. I think about a beer or a glass of wine, and that's not 1 unit. But so when you think about, when you say 8, it seems like, oh, is that 8 drinks? No, the reality is.
I'm going to test you then. So 3 pints of beer, how many units?
9.
Correct. Well, it depends on the strength of beer, but yeah.
You can say, I'm not going light beer.
yeah, you're going heavy. Okay, that's good. A bottle of wine.
Oh, a whole bottle?
A whole bottle.
I know a glass is 3, but I wouldn't actually know. Maybe.
Yeah, it's anywhere between 8 and 12, depending on how strong 8 and 12. Like an alcopop, sort of, like a a vodka with, like a fizzy vodka drink, the standard bottle, 330 mils.
I think it could be between 1.5 or 1, just depending on what the drink is. There's so many different varieties of what they put in these things, right? But
At least
correct me if I'm
is
wrong.
one thing when you're out. If you get a shot, that's 1 unit, and if it's a double, it's called a double for a reason because it's 2 units.
Right.
But that's if you're getting them poured by the barman. If you're pouring them at a party, there's no way that they are 1 unit each. There's no way.
Totally.
So I think, that's a good place to start is know how many units you're drinking of alcohol, because ultimately that's going to determine your risk of going low. So if I was a listener now, I think I would be going, okay, I'll go expose myself here. It's my birthday coming up on Saturday. And we're going
Excited
out we're going out for a fairly big day. So we're going to be start drinking probably about 3:30 in the afternoon and probably carry on till 3 in the morning. During that time, I will probably have in the realms of 7 to 13 drinks, which will probably be doubles. So I'll be hitting somewhere between kind of 15 to 25 units of alcohol consumption, I would suggest, over that period of time. So that would be like a typical big party day for me, which is well over the 8 units. It's kind of like pushing on triple. And I'm not saying that that's a thing to be proud of. It's just what's happened in my life. That's kind of how it is. Are you willing to say for you? Are you willing to say for you?
I was going to say, I also appreciate that you kind of normalize this, right? Is that for you, and the reality is you're having a good time. I think coming from 2 extroverts, I'll be willing to say, we get chatty. People love to give drinks out when I'm out with friends. My group of friends doesn't like to see me with an empty, cup. So that's just the reality of what my friend group is like. It really depends on the night, right? I think if it's a kind of more chill, casual night where we're just home and still having drinks, I think 9 would be kind of like at a minimum, right? Like a couple drinks over a couple of hours. It's really not that difficult to kind of hit that number. And I think that's important to talk about. I think on a heavier night where, we just came back from a wedding not too long ago, and that over a span of many hours, you start drinking early in the afternoon and that goes until the wee hours. Usually there's an after party after the wedding. So you could say you sometimes lose track, but easy to get into the 20 range. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would be surprised most people if they're sort of teenagers to 35 to 40 years old. As typical now, it'll be anywhere between 8 and 25 units of alcohol, pretty much there or thereabouts. And that becomes really important. So when we move on to the physiology, okay, we've just talked about units of alcohol, why we're talking about units of alcohol. So you can think, the easiest way to think of this, in my opinion, from what I've seen from the literature, is 1 unit of alcohol will kind of last in the body about 1 hour. So 20 units, 20 hours. So on Saturday, I want to start drinking at 3 in the afternoon. And not until probably 3 o'clock the next day that the impact of that alcohol will have worn off, which means my hypoglycemia risk is a 24-hour thing. And it's important to think about that because sometimes people just think, we're going out on the night, we're going to have a few drinks, and then by the morning when I get up, everything will be right. It won't be. If you had a big night, you're at risk of hypo all the way, or till that alcohol basically gets out of your system. So I think that's the key point in terms of know your units. It helps you understand the length of time your exposure to hypoglycemia is. So it's well worth just doing the maths on what you usually consume and how many hours it's likely that you'll be exposed to hypoglycemia risk. So why does that happen? Yeah. So I'm going to give you my best. I'm going to give you my best explanation of what's going on. And you can tell me I've done a good job and you can go in. So when we consume alcohol, basically our body, specifically our liver, which is important for detoxifying poisons, which alcohol essentially is, it goes, okay, this is a poison. Therefore, what I'm going to do is down tools on everything that I should be doing and prioritize getting this out of the body, which is a good thing for getting the poison out of your body. But when you think about type 1 diabetes, one of the key jobs of the liver is to release glucose that it has stored and also create new glucose from other things like proteins and fats. So if you stop your liver producing glucose because it's dealing with alcohol and your insulin level remains the same, bearing in mind that usually your background insulin or your basal insulin is a specific job to take that glucose that's produced by the liver and put it into your cells, you're going to have way too much insulin on board because there's not enough glucose around being produced by the liver. And if that's going to last for 20 hours, that's why your risk of hypoglycemia lasts for so long. So
And John, can we just
are you
add,
happy
I
with that?
love that. You nailed it. I think also just, I wish I knew this when I was in university, right? Because I think we'll probably touch on a few personal stories, but I think had I known that these effects would be so long, and can we just talk about type 1 diabetes and navigating this mismatch, which is literally what we deal with every single day? It's just amplified when you add a toxin into your body because the liver, we want it to be focusing on clearing out that toxin. It's just at the expense of where we also need some support with type 1 diabetes. And that's where it gets really tricky is that we're not saying don't focus on, what's happening with alcohol in the system. We wouldn't want that effect to be lasting any longer than it is. The liver is helping. But I think it's important to remember that this goes on for a long time and the liver's just busy. It's saying, sorry, I got other things to do right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key point is if you take nothing away from this first section is know how many units of alcohol you're drinking, roughly know your length of hypoglycemia risk, then you can start making strategic decisions with your carbohydrate supplementation, your insulin dose changes based on the time that you're going to be exposed to that risk. So that's the first part of that, but also a key second part of that and something that's often missed is the reason why your total backup hypoglycemia prevention or treatment solution is a glucagon injection. How that works is when you deliver that, it then sends the glucagon to the liver, which then purges all the glucose from the liver to stop the hypo. But if you don't have any in there because you've consumed loads of alcohol and you've stopped making glucose, the glucagon is likely to be extremely ineffective, if not effective at all. So I think there's been so many situations where people have had this really nasty hypoglycemic experience, and then the person who's supporting them is quite rightly has gone, wow, get the glucagon out, whack it in. They're expecting them to come around in 15 to 20 minutes, and it doesn't happen. What they should have done was phone the ambulance straight away. Definitely try the glucagon afterwards, but phone the ambulance first because you're going to need a drip with glucose going into your blood to provide glucose from the outside. And the reason why I know this is because when I was 28, I think, sorry, I was actually woke up in the back of an ambulance with that very situation. I'd gone out after cricket, had hardly eaten anything, having a great time, but then I'd gone too far low and then just kind of wandered off myself. And next thing you know, I was woken up in the back of an ambulance. So fortunately for me, I had some type 1 diabetes identification on. So they knew, the ambulance people knew to get a drip into my arm. So if I didn't have that, how were they going to find out? Because at that point I was in injections. I'm not even sure I had my injection stuff with me. This is a bit, obviously, that's just real life. So that's from personal experience. I got quite lucky there. And that sort of, if I would have known this information then, I don't think I would have got in that situation.
Absolutely. I think one piece, John, I just wanted to bring up too is, would you suggest then don't use glucagon at all in these kind of emergency situations, which I just want to clarify because I'm curious what you think. And I actually went in to try to find any recent literature on this because my big thing is like glucagon may not work well, like we say, if at all. But if it's going to work a little bit, again, do what you said first, call 911, do what you need to do, get help on the way. It doesn't mean don't use glucagon. I don't think it's going to not do anything at all. It may help a little, but like we explained, it probably won't do enough on its own. And so I just want people to be aware it doesn't mean don't try. It could be helpful, but it should not be your kind of sole means of getting blood sugars back up because it probably won't be effective. And I guess on that note, I just wanted to share sort of a similar unfortunate story. And mine was in university. And I think, again, to normalize that this does happen and we're not proud of these moments, but it's a learning opportunity for me. If I had known any of the things I know now, I would do things very differently, which is why we'll talk a little bit more about tips and tricks and what we've learned in our hardships and also in the research that we've done. So I will say that for me, it was in university. Mine was a fun night until it wasn't. And I was sick and I was dropping. My blood sugars were dropping. I could not keep any food down. I could not keep anything down. I remember trying to drink Gatorade because I was thinking get some electrolytes in me and nothing was staying down. And that is not a situation I want anybody to be in. But the reality is one of the scariest days of my life was in that situation of seeing my blood sugars low. I could not do anything, even though I was conscious and alert and trying my best to get some food and drink in me to get my blood sugars up. I ended up getting an ambulance come and same thing, IV glucose. And as scary as that was, I've learned a lot since then and just really didn't understand the pre stuff would have been very helpful. Like what should we have done beforehand to avoid one of those situations? It doesn't mean don't drink ever. Maybe don't drink that much. That day I definitely learned, but that was one of my scary situations for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's actually, it's interesting to hear you saying that and obviously hearing myself say that. And I think we'd probably regard ourselves as two pretty informed individuals. But even still, it doesn't matter when you're coming up and you're sort of learning this on the fly. If you don't have the right information in the base case, it's so easy to, that experimentation just goes a step too far. So again, it's just an important point. If you're going to experiment with alcohol, you don't go in with 20 units in one go if you've never had a drink before. You got to start low and build up slowly and find your kind of level of what's possible for you.
Start low, go slow.
That's it. And from a serious note with parents, a lot of chats I have with the parents, you've got parents listening thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to let my kid go out and have a drink because this just sounds too scary. Mm-hmm. Number one, that's not going to work because generally society is built in a way where it's just everywhere. So whether you like or whether you don't like that, it's going to become part. A more sensible way is going, okay, this is going to happen. So how about we have a couple of drinks together and we see what happens. We manage the glucose level and then we have a couple more and then we have a couple more. Then you get to learn their response. You get to see what they're like. You get to see whether they're a good drunk or not. I mean, I've got friends who are terrible drunks. They're like, you kind of like, after about 3 drinks, and other people just having a time of life. Who knows how you're going to, respond to these type of, different psychoactive substances. So as a parent, you will also get to see how your young person changes with taking something like that. Yeah. And then you've got the opportunity to go, I actually feel safer now. Well, we've got some strategies and I also know what they're going to be like. And you can also mirror back to them what they are. So I would really encourage parents who you've got children, people of that age where they're getting into that is there's a lot to be said for doing it safely together and learning together, especially in understanding the risks together.
I also think on that note, again, I'm not meaning to put my mom on the spot here. If she listens to this, she'll probably be mortified. But I remember being at a pretty young age. I definitely wasn't of legal drinking age and told my mom I wanted to try a couple drinks. And what the compromise was, instead of arguing with me, that's how the Europeans start, usually was like, what? And then it was, why don't I do it at home? We'll be in the basement. You are upstairs. And at least I'm home and in a safe place, And this was just an important place where I know my mom was probably traumatized to have to compromise with me because it sounded like I had already made up my mind. But to be in a safe situation where she knew where I was and she would be able to respond if something was needed was really helpful. But it took a little bit of discussing that we would get there and do it safely together. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think there's a couple of key points there. So I'm just going to throw in a few things here because I remember at one point, I went deep into that alcohol thing to try and find out what's going on, what's happening. It's just my nature, unfortunately. But some of the things that I kind of picked up along the way I just thought was interesting. And we're going to throw these in before we get into the diabetes specific stuff. Because I always just think why when I wake up in the morning, can I not remember sometimes I can remember nothing and sometimes I can remember a little bit. And we're looking into it. Obviously, there's several different stages of sleep, but REM sleep is the particular type of wave sleep where your brain connects existing knowledge to the knowledge that you've learned in that day. And when you consume alcohol, it basically stops the REM sleep. So you do have those memories, they just don't connect with your existing memories. So that's why when you wake up, you're like, what happened? What happened last night? I'm sure a lot of people have that experience, but that's why he kind of gets rid of your REM sleep. And that's also the reason why I had an Oura ring at one point, which tracked your sleep. And I saw what alcohol did to it. I had a choice. Don't drink alcohol or get rid of the ring. I obviously got rid of the ring.
Funny you say that because I just got an Oura ring, so this is actually really funny.
Take it off when you go drinking. Just take it off. Don't look at it.
Now that you say that, John, I was like, oh my gosh, if I go drinking, I literally just got it this week. So this is kind of funny because I said, now I kind of want to test out my REM sleep. But can we just also normalize? Life is very stressful and hectic that even in the last few days that I've been wearing this ring, my REM sleep already right now on a non-drinking day is not great. Not everybody has perfectly sound sleep. And I think it's also important with diabetes to just normalize that we're already almost at a disadvantage with type 1 diabetes. There's already a lot of disturbances, the amount of alarms we have going off or just interrupted sleep. Now throw in drinking. I'm just saying that, it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I had to get rid of the Oura ring. Tracking glucose levels was enough. Putting sleep in REM sleep and then wake up in the morning getting the negative placebo going, it's a score of 35. How am I going to get on today? I don't want to do it.
This might be gifted to somebody very soon.
Not to me. Okay, good. Right then. So we've covered a few key things. One is risk of hypoglycemia is determined by units drunk. So know your units, number one. Number two, if you're going to be getting into this, start low, go slow. Number three, if you're a parent, really consider a supportive environment for the person who's going to be doing it, where you're able to support them and learn together. So I think there's three key things that's really worth sort of just summarizing before we kick on. So we've got that. Now we're going to get into specific strategies, because this is where the rubber meets the road. So we've just sort of said, we know alcohol, risk of going low, but not necessarily all the time. And initially, it depends on the drinks that you drink, whether they contain carbohydrate or not. So I'll give you my approach. I want to hear your approach about how it goes. So I've drunk drinks in the past where I'd go out and drink beers, which have got carbs in, then you go high first, and they sort of like coming down. And for me, just keeping an eye on the glucose level and seeing it go up, and then is it going to come down? It's just like, that is not for me. It's not for me at all. So I just go for the drinks with no carbs in whatsoever. I'm not going to go high, but I know the risk of going low is definitely going to be there. That just makes it easy for me to go, I'm just on a pure insulin reduction situation. Get that insulin right down, and I don't have to worry about going high. I'll just kind of stay fairly normalish as long as I get the insulin reduction correct, and I can always supplement with just like 10 or 15 grams carbs as I go. For me, I found that the easiest way to manage it. As soon as I start having beers and ciders, is like going really high, and it's like, what's going on? So that's kind of my approach. Where do you sit on the carb, no carb?
This one's tough because I think it depends on the day. Sometimes I'm a big cocktail fan. Like, we've got really great bars in the city. We've got really great cocktail bars that make really fun drinks. I find those days very challenging because usually we walk to bars. Usually there's a lot of walking in between. So we're already doing some activity mixed with some drinking, usually some sugary based cocktails. I just think it throws a wrench into everything. But I will say, I also just love a good cocktail here and there. I will say my norm of what I genuinely enjoy is I just love the taste of beer. And for me, that's my go-to. I will always stick to beers, usually kind of regular strength and not the light beers. And so for me, like you said, it is a little bit challenging. I think I've accepted that sometimes my blood sugar will be just a little bit higher. And I think it's important to normalize that it's okay to be up there a little bit higher and just let the glucose come down kind of on its own. I think we also often don't talk about AID. I think like a lot of the guidance that we were given was on MDI or on open loop. And all of a sudden now think about auto corrections and how much this could really make things troublesome with automated insulin delivery. So I will say beer is usually my go-to choice, but that means I have to be a little bit more on top of things. And I'll give you my other tips once we get to that.
Sure. And you're using AID now, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah. So I don't, but not for any other reason that I'm just a freak and I need to know what my insulin conditions are. It's like, it does my head in if I don't. But we'll definitely come to that when we kind of pass out. Okay, now these are the sort of ideas. What do you do for an AID? What do you do if you're on standard pump therapy? What do you do on multiple day injections? So we'll absolutely cover that. So the principle from there is, if you're going to drink drinks with carbohydrate in, expect to rise in the initial period, because the carbohydrate, there'll be no insulin to cover that. Let's take AID out of the situation. Generally, what will happen is you'll go high and then you'll start to drift down overnight and generally kind of be okay. And if you're not, then you can always have like a snack before bed and push it back up again. And that's how the education's always been up until AID has been kind of like, if you're going to drink with carbs in, don't really give any insulin, maybe run a bit higher, let it come down, and a bit of safety snack before bed. And that was all good. But obviously, as you've just described there, we've now got automated insulin delivery systems in there. Every time you go above target, it's going to be shoving extra insulin in and pushing that insulin on board. And you already know later on, you're going to be exposed to hypoglycemia risk. So you're kind of like, oh, right then, maybe the bonus of that is actually going to turn into a bit of a challenge. Like, how we're going to navigate that.
Yep.
So let's get into specifics. So I'm going to take my playbook, which is we're going to go for the no carb drinks, and we're just going to go for the big insulin reductions. And we're going to go for you, which is going to be like, you're going to get like 5 beers in and 50 grams of carbs, push it up. And then obviously we'll sort of manage there. And just to say that, not only do you need to know your number of units of alcohol, you need to know how many grams of carbs are in each drink. So if you drink a standard beer, like 10 grams, if you're a cocktail, one of those fancy ones you're talking about, you could be slamming 30 grams of carbs in one of those bad boys.
Easy, yeah.
Whew. And that's a big jump. You have 2 of those, 60 grams of carbs unanswered without insulin. You are going high at that point.
Also, how do you know what's in those? I think that's one of the challenges. A beer is kind of a somewhat standard drink. They're not usually throwing in all these extra things. A cocktail, I have no idea what you're putting in, especially these cocktail bars. Like they're throwing in all the fancy things. Simple syrups are so easy to throw into a cocktail and often make them taste good. That's 50-50 sugar to water, right? So it's kind of scary. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're a good-looking girl going up to the bar, then you get all the extras free. If you're someone like me, just kind of like, yeah, there you go, mate. You can have that total bog standard drink. You're like, oh, cheers, bud. But yeah.
Extra ice in yours.
Yeah, a nice one. Okay. Cool. I'm on a standard pump therapy. So this is very similar to multiple day injection. So I guess the playbook would be, so we've just said, I'm going to go out. We'll take this Saturday coming up. We're going to plan for 20 units of alcohol. That means for 20 hours, I'm going to be at risk of hypoglycemia. I'm going to go in with drinks, which is going to be either wine or spirits with diet mixers, and then use that to try and keep the glucose level not going too high, but knowing I'm going to have to seriously reduce my insulin. So the kind of suggestion around reducing your background insulin will fall anywhere between 25 to 75% reductions, generally based on the units of alcohol you're consuming. So in my playbook, it's like a night of 20 units is quite big. I'm going at least a 50% to 75% reduction on my background insulin, which for me, I'm on about 20 units of background insulin altogether. I will ramp that basal rate down so it's only going to give me 12 units over the 24-hour period, and I'll keep that running until the next day, until like that time period has run up. That generally will keep me in a good area. That only I will need as we go along is some top-up carbs as we go. I use, if I drop below 7 or 125 milligrams per deciliter, then I'll just put 10 or 15 grams in to always nudge me, keep me above 7. Between 7 and 10, I'm happy in that space. So that would kind of be the playbook for drinks with no carbs in. So let's
John,
flip
can
that
I
up
ask? Yeah. Before we flip to me, can I just a clarification, because I think this is important for people, is that on any non-drinking day to reduce your long-acting or basal insulin by that much is not a great idea, because you would just end up running high all day the next day, depending on when you take your long-acting. But in these situations, remember that the liver is really struggling to help you out in these situations. So do you have any recommendations when you say a range of 25 to 75%?
Yeah, so I just tend to, I tend to go like the smaller the volume of alcohol, the smaller the basal reduction. So if I was only going to have like 6 or 7 units, I would only take it down 25. If I'm getting into the kind of like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 units, I'm kind of going 50. Maybe if I'm going big, like I went to a festival before for 3 days and just run on 20% basal for 3 days solid, no problems. I mean, that's the level of reduction you're looking at in such a heavy intake. So I would say you're going to need to think about scaling, but this is where practice comes in. I didn't just end up at this number by the first time I tried it. It took some serious trial and error to get to there. You know what I mean? I had to put in some practice.
But like you said, you don't start like, with the heavy days of 3 days long festivals. You start with just a couple drinks. So I think also in this similar situation, start slow and do small reductions, just like small amounts of drinking, and then ramp it up as you want to trial this. I also wanted to say, worst case scenario, if you reduce, long-acting insulin a little bit too aggressively, let's just say you run a little higher. What is the big deal? It's going to be for typically 24 hours. And I think the concern at the end of the day is just, we want to protect the liver because it's not able to really do much to help us in these situations. So thanks.
I mean, I totally agree with that. Is if you're going to be doing anything, you reduce the insulin a little bit more than you were anticipating to stay on the higher side is better than the other way around going, oh, I want perfect controls. Like I would, my zone is between 7 and 10, 7 and 12. If I sit between there, that's what, 120 over 200, something like that on milligrams per deciliter. If I sit within there, I am happy with that. Like that's a safe zone for me. Running lower than that is just, you're too busy thinking like, well, I want to drop. It's just, not fun.
We also want to make sure people aren't comfortable, like, above 300 or say above 15 or 17 millimoles. We want people to be in a comfortable range where they feel okay. And we haven't really jumped into this, but also just to add in, like a lot of these nights, especially if it's a festival, you're doing lots of dancing, right? So we'll get into that too. But I just want to make sure you're not sitting at home doing absolutely nothing. So part of this reduction is also covering that. So
but you've seen me doing the worm on the Espad dance hall before. I like to get into, if you know, bust out a few moves. All right. So that's the alcohol, very low carbs. So you're saying now, let's just take you on a similar night, 20 units of alcohol, but you're doing beers. You're doing like 5, 6, 7, 8 beers at the beginning, which is going to be what, 70 grams of carbs. Are you doing, what are you doing with your basal? If you, let's just say that you're not on AID. Let's just say, take you back to days when you're injections or a pump without AID. What are you doing to think about that initial surge in the glucose? Are you just leaving it, or are you putting a bit of carbs in?
I think to simplify things, and you can correct me if you disagree, but I think similar to what you would do on MDI is that 25 to 75% basal reduction from when you're starting, or at least thinking about starting to drink, until the next day. Like, this doesn't need to be short-lived. It could be for a long period of time and until the next day, typically, to make sure that you feel protected. And I think, again, start small. So you could start with a 25% basal reduction, do it for many hours into the next morning, because we not only want to protect during the night, but also into overnight and into the next day. So typically I'm looking at 24-hour periods with this if I am on open loop. But
and are
what would your
you
thoughts be?
giving any insulin to for the glucose level going high initially, or you're not?
So for me, again, this is, I'm a little bit more flexible with just running my sugars a little bit higher, but on open loop, like, I would still consider, maybe less bolus insulin, but still 70 grams of carbs. It's not all happening at once, but that's going to stack up, and that's going to cause some problems later on. So anywhere from 0 to 50% bolus, right? I think we just need to kind of think about it is, if you're having up to that 70 grams, I think at the start, I'm often actually bolusing, quite heavily for those drinks, and then never usually the full amount. So I will say 50% is usually my comfortable spot, but I think it's different for every person. I would be scared to go 70 grams completely uncovered, let's just say. So what about you?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, because obviously I don't just drink that exclusively. But when I used to play cricket, I used to love beers after cricket. I mean, it's so good. You'd kind of finish a hot day in the field, you just like 3 beers down. It's all brilliant. But if I did that without covers, within
Hmm.
bolus insulin, I'd be going to like 15, 16. I'd be pissed off with that. So I'd
Yeah.
be like, okay, I'm just going to go half carbs in for the first lot of drinks and then back off after that. So it's kind of like maybe a bit more bolus heavy, between 25, 50% for the first few beers. And then once the alcohol starts to kick in, like back that
Done.
right
Yeah.
off, back that right
Agreed.
off.
Agreed.
So
It's also
again,
better to
start low.
start at the beginning with more of that insulin, because the last thing we want is to like stack up insulin when liver's already having a little bit of trouble because it's clearing out toxins. So
And also, you're still with
yeah,
it at the beginning as well. You don't want to start firing in boluses when you're already hammered. That's not a good place to be. So, yeah, I
absolutely.
totally agree with that. So, again, I think it's principle of, if you're going to put in bolus insulin, you start low, you go slow, you go more so at the beginning and then back off as you kind of have a few more drinks. And there. So, we're basically, for both of those, you've got similar strategies. We've got
Yeah.
bolus reduction, basal reductions based on units drunk, generally. And then we've got the only difference is we're going to put a little bit of bolus insulin for the carbohydrates if it's going to reach, kind of 50, 60, 70 grams, but no more than 50%, and build up slowly. So
Hmm.
that's kind of going to take care of the before and the after. And are you similar? You kind of like, you're running your glucose levels like between 120, 200. Are you comfortable in there?
That's me. I'm happier to be a little bit higher, because I think through these incidents of scary lows, I would much rather wake up with a sugar even 200 than I would waking up, low. So yeah.
And what's your top up regime then? So like, you're drifting below 7 or 120. What are you kind of going for? Are you just going for a drink, an alcoholic drink with some sugar in, or are you necking some glucose tablets? What are you doing?
So it depends on how I'm feeling in this moment, right? I think sometimes if it's a heavy drinking day, and this is something we'll kind of talk about, but if someone was doing like a whiskey sour, it's still got some like sugar in it, or something like a rum and Coke. I know we often talk about, and you hear this in diabetes, often considering like a rum and Diet Coke. That's not my drink of choice, but I think it's just a simple one to think of. The odd time I will actually incorporate a rum and regular Coke. And I think it doesn't mean I'm drinking the whole thing, but sometimes just getting some extra sugar in, just so I can make sure I'm not going full carb free. For me, that's if I'm kind of going low carb during, the beginning part. Sometimes I will throw in a drink that's got a little bit more carb. So I think it really just depends. But I think what we haven't really talked about is the carb part, which we'll talk about a little bit more too, of what foods. And to be fair, I think one thing that I do in between is, instead of just having beer, I like to throw in, as I've grown up and now as an adult, is whether it's a water or something that is not alcoholic in between each drink, to space it out a little bit more over time. So something I used to
I'm
not
not
do.
sure about that. I'm looking at your face with how true that is, but we'll see.
Depends on the day, but honestly, it helps so I don't have that hangover the next day. I will tell
Right,
you.
that's true. Okay, good. So we've kind of covered the multiple injections and pumps, kind of what to do during. And we said if you're dropping below 7, you've got multiple options. Always carry hypo treatment with you is absolutely essential, of course. But you can just I'll throw in a cider. I love a cider, but I wouldn't drink it normally. But if I was below 7, it's well, it's next excuse to have a cider. Just push it back up a little bit. So yeah, if you understand how these things work, generally 10 to 15 grams of carbs are going to push your sugar level up by about 3 millimoles per litre, or 60 milligrams per deciliter. Again, just a simple strategy to know how much is going to nudge you either way. It kind of helps you just those little bits as you go. Okay, good. Now, so we've covered injections and pump therapy, but now we've got a new player on the market, which is these automated insulin delivery systems, which the best thing about them is they respond to the glucose levels and the speed of the glucose moving. So if it goes up, it's giving more insulin. If it's dropping down, it's cutting down the insulin, which in standard play is amazing. However, as we've described, if you're in a situation where you've just drunk 60 grams of carbs and you haven't given any insulin for it, and you're going up to 15, 20 or 300, 350, you better believe that is sticking a lot of insulin in to bring that down, which is going to cause you some serious issues later on. So
yeah, not only short term, but also long term effects. You're just going to be stacking up a lot of insulin, and it's a scary place to be.
So what are you saying then? So we obviously know that these systems have some options to reduce insulin. What would be your go-to for these systems when we're considering? I think it's more so the nights where you're drinking drinks with carbs in that scare me the most with these systems. The ones without carbs in, well, it's just going to suspend the insulin. So you're kind of in a fairly safer position. But if you're someone who drinks drinks with carbs and you're going to push that glucose level high because that's what your previous experience has told you is safe, it may not be as safe on one of these systems. So what options have we got with the AID systems to reduce this risk?
I think these systems are not built for these things in mind, just like they're not necessarily built for exercise in mind. They're not built for drinking in mind. They're built really well to work at rest.
They haven't got the right people designing them, have they? That's the problem.
If you and I were designing these pumps, we'd have a lot to say. But I will say that setting a higher glucose target is still an important kind of concept, right? Whether it's exercise mode, activity feature, temp target, whatever it might be on those different systems. Remember that even though those are kind of exercise specific settings, it does increase the target to be higher, whether it's 8.3 or 150, whatever it might be. At least having that number where it's targeting a glucose value that is higher is always going to be safer than targeting what maybe your usual range is, which may be as low as 100 or 110. We really want to make sure that we increase that target if we can. So what my typical go-to strategy is set that higher glucose target again until the next day. I don't set it for just a couple of hours. I set it overnight into the next day. It could be upwards of 24 hours. For me, that's really important, but we still have to remember about the auto corrections with many of these systems. So it's not perfect and it's not foolproof, but I would much rather a pump be targeting 150 or 8.3 than it is targeting a much lower glucose value. And what about you, John?
Yeah, 100%. So I think for me, this comes in phases. So your step one is you don't go in with a heavy night straight up with when you change over to one of these systems. You need to see how it's going to behave. Always get the activity mode on, whatever it's called in your different systems. As you just described, it's going to reduce the insulin. I think the reality from what I've seen is if people really do push themselves up high with multiple, carb heavy drinks, they're going to have a real problem later on. So we've had a few people who, regardless of putting the activity mode on, hasn't worked. We've just gone back old school. We've gone, before you go out, you turn it into manual mode. You put a 50% basal rate on, and you just go and do what you used to do, or you go and do what we. That was
going to be my part two. Yeah, if this isn't, absolutely.
If it's not working, just be safe. You can guarantee the safety.
Yeah, if we can manage a 50% basal reduction, and we know that's actually what the system is doing. As much as I don't always encourage kind of going back to manual mode, maybe don't test it out on a heavy night of drinking, but if we want to test it out slow when you're at home, that might be a good way. I can tell you when a lot of people want to know exactly what's happening, and probably one of the reasons that you're on injections is having that ability to know exactly what's going on. Well, switching to manual mode gives you a little bit more clarity on what's actually happening. So
yeah, I think in those circumstances, I'm not saying do that as first up, but if you have problems with the current hypoglycemia because you like to go out and drink drinks with carbs in, probably your only solution moving forward for complete consistency will be to go back to manual mode, half the basal rate, just as described before, and just go back to the old playbook. And what you can also do then as well is you can get away with having that snack before bed and not worrying about it, because the problem you have with an AID system, if you have a big snack without before bed, as you used to do to keep yourself safe, you're going to push high and you're going to fall low again. It's like, you know, kind of what you do. So on that note, you get in, everything's all good. You've managed it beautifully, glucose levels, and you're still in a good place to kind of check your sugar level and you know what's happening. What's your kind of before bed number that you need to be above to kind of feel like, do you know, I'm all good here? And at what time are you supplementing with extra carbs just to kind of give you that safety till the morning?
Look, here's probably where having those scary lows has pushed me up to be a little bit higher than maybe the average person. But, you know, if I was going to bed above probably 120, 150, like I feel much happier there. I think for me, these are values that, yeah, I mean, even when I think about that, 7 to 10 millimoles, like even if I was in that range, I'd feel comfortable. If I get anywhere below that, I start to get a little nervous about just, I think I need something before I go to sleep. What about you?
Yeah, similarly, it's got to be above 7. So ideally, if it's above 7, between 7 and 10, I'll just have enough carbs. Like I say, I know that 10 grams pushes me up by 3, just enough to push me up above 10, and I'm happy to drift down from there. I've already done the basal reductions. I am in a safe place there. If I go to bed below 7 without doing something, well, I'm going to have problems. So that's kind of my number. I want to just kind of, I'd ideally like to get it to 10, which would be 180 in your speak, and then it can drift down from there. I know it's not really going to drop more than 110 if I've already done the basal reductions. That puts me at a happy place. So I think that's, you know, everyone will be different, but kind of having those numbers in your mind just helps you decide what you're going to do. And then similarly, if you're going to have a huge eat before you go to bed, like I wouldn't do any more than half the insulin for like, if I was really hungry, have a big pizza or something like that, I would be giving some insulin, but I wouldn't be giving it all. I'd be giving like half at maximum.
Absolutely. And like we said, we have to remember, like, what is that night of drinking going to look like? Is it partying and dancing? Is it, you know, are you walking around a lot? Like we do a lot of walking if we're out in the city. And so we're not always taking, you know, transit or to get around. So you're adding in activity on top of drinking. There are many instances where you could get away with a lot less insulin, if no insulin, you know, at all for a bolus at least. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I do a lot, I wear a normal pump in daily life, but when it comes to going out partying and dancing, like I'm going out Saturday, I want to be dancing. I'm going to be dancing all night and I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to be sweating. I'm going to have a chance of ripping my cannula out. So I just go back to injections for the night. I take the pump off before I go out at 7 p.m., put my background insulin at 50%. So I said before, like 20 units background, I'll put 12 units in via my Levemir, and then that's it. I'm good. I'm free. I'm not attached to no pump. I have a great time. I already done my basal reductions. I can get as sweaty as I want. I can dance around, and I know that I don't have any of those problems. And then all I do is pick up the next day, put my pump back on, but know that that background insulin is lasting till that night. Like it's staying in until like 8 p.m. that night. So I'll just run a reduced basal on there. And that's not too dissimilar to like sports people. It's slightly different, apart from they're doing good things and you're going and having and dancing, slightly different. But the principle is still the same, is that you can detach yourself from your pump or your system, put a reasonable amount of insulin in, and then be kind of free of those challenges of taking the cannula off. Because I've had it before where you go out and you're just getting into the night and then your cannula gets pulled off and you're like, damn, I have to go home now. And then once you go home, I don't want to come back out. I'm just going to stay out. And then you run high and you're like, I don't know, I should have gone back. It's like, just done that too many times. If I have a big night, I'm going back to injections for that night. And then I'm getting stuck in.
Agreed. I think carrying a bunch of extra things, like low supplies, always should have those regardless. But I was going to say, no one's really dragging around extra, you know, infusion sets, extra cannulas, extra reservoirs. That's just a lot to ask for on a night where, remember that like our mental state is not fully clear as well. So I think we want to take away at least some of that decision making. So I totally get it. I will say one really key thing that I've kind of learned through the years of living with diabetes is always have your nightstand stocked up with things very close. You do not want to have to be looking for low supplies in the fridge or far away where you have to walk to it. You want it to be right there and available. So that is everything from juice to candies to whatever, to your glucagon. Just reiterating that needs to be very close.
I'm just thinking, I'm actually going to say this out loud, but I'm going to say it because it's in my head now. Oh, God. Okay.
You might regret this later.
So there's also another bonus of deciding to go back to injections for those nights. Because some people are self-conscious about having canners and stuff. If you get lucky and you're single on that night out, you've got nothing to explain. You've got nothing to explain. You've got nothing attached to you. Just get on with business, whatever you're going to do. But
There
what
you
I'm
go.
saying is, if you're someone who is like quite self-conscious about those things, it's quite weird if you meet someone for the first time. Not saying that you should have one night stands, but sometimes these things happen. Is you don't want to be self-conscious of that conversation yet about what's going on. Actually, not having something stuck to you. It's not having a CGM, of course, but a bit different. You got a wire hanging off you or something like that. So, as if people are self-conscious with that, sometimes that can be another feather in the cap for a back to injection tonight. Not that ever happened to me, of course.
Well, I do think that this is just reality of one less thing to think about because you're not connected to a million different things. So, absolutely.
So I think we've covered the playbook of before, during, and after for all the different therapy types to give some sort of ideas. And obviously within the show notes and things like that, I'll put down what has been discussed. Not that this is medical advice. They're just tips and tricks that people have used. Start low, go slow. So please don't expect these to work perfectly for you. You'll have to practice. But what we're saying for an emergency planning kit. So you've already said hypo treatment is a must. Hypo treatment by the stand of the bed is a must. Having both, I think this is important. I always do this, is I have a CGM and I always have a backup blood glucose meter with me because you never know if that's going to get pulled off or something like that. It's always important to have that. And if you're going to a festival, get 2 CGMs on before you go.
Mm-hmm.
Get them in. So if one fails, you can just flick to the other one. That way, no trouble. So we've got those covered. What are you saying about followers? You got people following you when you go out?
I am not a follow type, but I will say, look, one thing that I really struggled with was I always took devices off because like bracelets and things like that. Growing up, I was really athletic, so I just didn't have anything on me. One thing that I've got right now is it literally has on my watch, it says type 1 diabetes.
Oh,
so
nice.
It's a nice little thing I found online, and now it's really fun in the community. Sometimes you see people with their watches, they've got a little thing right there on their wrist. Whether it is, a medical alert bracelet or having something, I think that's also just really important to make sure it is visible so people know if it's needed. I will say I don't have necessarily followers, but I do have Night Scout because I am using AID. And so I've shared that with a few close people so they know if they need to check on me, they know how to find my data and find me online.
Yeah, I think you're well practiced enough now to not need followers as I am. But I think certainly for young people and parents as you're growing up, as you get going, it makes sense to have followers. It makes sense to have people who can help you out if you're going to be struggling. The older you get, maybe you don't, because maybe you kind of know what you're doing and the risk is not as high. But I think it's important when you start on your journey with that, you should really consider that, and it also make your parents feel a little bit better as well. I think I
also am not trying to normalize like not having followers. I think the important thing is my way of usually going out with friends is that I've always got someone there with me that basically is my follower in person. And so I'm not doing this where I'm going out drinking on my own. It's usually I've got one person that is my go-to, whether it's someone that's driving that day and not drinking. Usually I like to have my people close. And so that's usually who it is. But I absolutely agree. I think it's really important to have, even if it is for a night of drinking, that designated person that you will give your follow and share details to. So I do think that that's extremely important.
Yeah, and I think this is probably a good point to actually just reiterate that and say, obviously, have someone you're comfortable with, who's out with you, know what's going on. It's important. And I think as a sort of a final switch up before we close off is there's obviously clinicians listening in who'll be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize it was like so intricate and complicated and you got to learn. It's kind of like the conversations that I've been having with my people is like, oh, alcohol makes you go low. You got to be careful. Is probably, it's not going to cut the mustard. It's not going to cut the mustard in helping people think about it. So with that in mind, I'll give a few things that I will often use to kind of break the ice and conversations. Be interested to know what you've done in the past. But I think helping people who support people with diabetes bridge these conversations that's normalized, that's kind of reality, and that is helpful is so important because especially when young people are coming up between 14 to 18, trying to get a conversation is hard at the best of times. Never mind if you're going to be talking about something which is taboo, difficult to discuss, and maybe you're not supposed to be doing. You need a way to open and invite in. So my go-to is always what I call the sheep factor. Is you've just seen someone in clinic and the next person comes in and you start the conversation and you know that you need to be having this conversation. So I'll be like, okay, we just had, so-and-so in. And do you know what they were telling me? They're telling me their friends are sort of getting into drinking now. It's kind of like quite normal within their peer group, and what they go out and they do this, and then they have like 5 drinks here and then a few drinks there. Is that similar within your peer group? You just basically said it's completely normal for that person who I've just seen who's at the same clinic as you. I'm talking about their friends and your friends, so not you directly. So I'm opening it up for giving you every opportunity to go, yeah, my friends do that. Because if their friends doing that, they're doing that. And then it opens up just kind of like you've normalized it, you've given the opportunity, you just, no judgment. And that way then they can kind of like tell you if they want to. They might not want to, but you've got to at least open that opportunity. If you got any go-tos that you used?
Well, I think, John, if I saw you in clinic, I would be like, now I feel like I can openly share because you just gave me a safe space to do that. And I will say, I think part of that is also putting aside if your beliefs are different. And as a clinician, maybe you don't drink or you don't believe in this should be done, especially at underage drinking. Again, not saying that we're promoting this, but I think if you open up that door, and we talk about this a lot, like in camp settings, a lot of teenage kids getting together, they're going to start having these conversations, whether we like it or not. And so really, it's just important that we open up that conversation so people know that it's a safe space. And I really like how you said that and you framed it. So it's not pointing at you directly, but it could be this group of friends they talked about and this group of friends, but it doesn't have to be you specifically, right? Anyone hearing that targeted at you could be really scary. So, and not feeling like they want to open up. I'm in a very, very similar space. I think you and I both, I think, share a lot of our personal stories and often our personal struggles just to open the door to let people know that I'm not here to show my perfect 5.5 blood sugar all day long, because the reality is that's not what happens. And so that doesn't mean we're just going to show all the craziness, but it is to show and to normalize that. How do we do this safely? So I think that's kind of the goal for us from the clinical side.
And I think that's even more so important when it comes to drugs. I know we're going to cover drugs or stimulants or whatever in this particular one. We'll cover that in a second and third round. But that conversation is even more important when it comes to having those things, because people are less likely to tell you what they're doing and to normalize it, and trying to put aside your beliefs, what you would do for your kids, what you do for different things, and realize that it's not about you, it's about them. It's about what they need. It's about the conversation that they need to have. And you've got to really be careful to kind of just put that aside and let them tell you what they're thinking of doing, so you can give them support in whichever way that it is. And I think it's easier with alcohol than it is with drugs. I think so many people have a really difficult conversation or time even thinking about opening the door to that conversation. Number one, because they probably don't know what these things do. And number two, because like it's not in their belief system, or it's not in their, it's never been in that environment before. So we'll cover a bit more of that in the next time, but I think it's just a good segue to sort of like what will come up sort of as we move through this sort of 3-part series as we kind of go on. So bring it all together. If I'm going to try and summarize what I think we've been through, and you can tell me where I've missed things out.
We talked about a lot.
Yeah, we've covered a lot. So we said, first of all, you need to know your units. Your units determine your risk. So know your alcohol units is number one. Number two is then know how many carbs roughly you're going to be consuming. And then those two things alone will determine your strategy. You're definitely going on a basal reduction, regardless of how you're doing it, anywhere between 25 and 75% due to the new number of units consumed. And then if you're drinking drinks with carbs in, you're potentially going to put a little bit of carbs in up front. If the number's getting over 50, 60 grams, you half maximum, but you start low and go very slow and find out. And that's going to kind of give you a playbook. We've said as we're going along, you don't want to be dropping below 7 or 125, and anywhere between that 125, 200 or 7 and kind of 12 is a good place to be during, and also make sure you're in that zone before bed. We said that AID systems may pose an additional problem that we've never seen before, which is if you go high, it's going to shovel extra insulin in. If you have big problems with that, despite putting the activity mode on, you may decide to go back to manual mode with 50% basal and just stay safe. But that will be up to you and your sort of provider as you kind of go along. We said there is an alternative strategy that if you're really going to go for it and you don't want to be attached to something, you can just go back to injections and put 50% of your basal in for the 24 hours and detach yourself from the pump, take a quick acting pen out with you if you need it, and therefore you can be detached. So that's also possible, a way of kind of completely getting, safe and also, not a risk of pulling a cannula out or something like that. So I think from a strategy perspective, that was kind of getting about everything that we've covered. I mean, I don't know why we needed an hour. I could have just started at the beginning and could have saved ourselves some time, but
We'll just tell people jump to 103 in the video and just listen to the 5-second summary at the end. No, I think that was awesome.
we also covered the list, didn't we, of stuff that you need with you. So what did we have on there again?
Well, I was also, just before we jump to that, I want to make sure that we also think about hypoglycemia and, with drinking can also mimic very similar like symptoms, right? And we didn't explicitly call that out, but I think that's also really important, and why having someone who knows your symptoms and knows what that is, you can often mistake kind of drunk with hypoglycemia. Those symptoms sometimes get really blurred. I think it's really important to kind of talk about this, because not only is that a key reason to have someone following you, but also just to make sure that if there is someone that's drinking less or someone that may be a little bit more responsible than you are that night, to check in and make those check-ins really important every hour just to see how you're doing. So that is really key. And one other thing I just wanted to add about the carb feeding is try to avoid drinking on an empty stomach. I just think about how many times people would go out and really not focus on what they were going to eat. Maybe they'll focus on what they'll eat later, but try to incorporate kind of a full meal that is like kind of complex carbs, some proteins and fats. Do that at the start. Make sure you get something in your system. You do not want to be doing this with an empty stomach. So just to make that clear, I also wanted to make sure I point out those two things.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And yeah, obviously we said, kind of you can never have enough hypo treatment around, either with you, with your friends, by your bedstand, etc., etc. So kind of have that stuff with you. Obviously, you can carry an extra cannula with you when you're out, then great. So if you've got a partner, so obviously my partner, Danny, like, have you got your bag? We'll stick some of that stuff in there. And she's like, I'm supposed to have a lady's bag. Now look at this. I've got like a suitcase I'm going out with. You're going to be kidding me.
That's why you got a +1 that they can help out.
Yeah, 100%. So what I will do is in the show notes, I will obviously put these key strategies down. I'll also create a bit of a lead piece FAQ so people can capture all the good stuff in one go. And then I guess that just really kind of leaves to, in the next one, we're going to focus on stimulants and really sort of take away the stigma of legality, because it changes everywhere, and just talk about the effects of what these things do. So that can range from anything from caffeine to nicotine to amphetamines to MDMA. All things are stimulants. Some are legal, some are not, and we'll sort of talk a little bit about that. But ultimately, if people are going to experiment with these things, they need to know what they do, they need to know what the risks are, and also from a diabetes perspective, how to stay safe. So those are kind of what we'll cover in the sort of the next one, and then we'll finish the one with kind of cannabis and the hallucinogens, kind of a bit more in the totally mind messing era. We'll leave that to the third one, I think. But for now, I just want to say, number one, thank you for giving us an hour of your time and being very generous, not only with your expertise and education, but your personal stories. And I think people will really appreciate that knowing that someone who really knows their stuff has had some real struggles with alcohol management, and it is real, but with some practice and some thinking about it and understanding, it can be done safely if you so choose. It's not ever asked to drink, it's totally their choice.
Thanks for having me, John. It's always a pleasure. I think we could talk for hours, so it was hard enough to keep this to an hour for us. But I will just say thanks for always being an open book. I learn from you every time we get to chat. So hopefully there will be some key takeaways for people so they can be safe when they go out drinking.
Indeed. Well, until round two, have a nice weekend. Is it Monday? I don't even know what day it is. It's Monday. Have a good week, and I'll catch you later.
Take care.